creativity and innovation. But my focus is really going to be on how to overcome the barriers to create. But you can't have innovation without the creativity. So let me ask, what is the relationship between creativity and innovation? But how? Yes, and what makes the difference is creativity is coming up with a new idea. And that idea can be about a process, a product, a service, might even be a new way to position in a marketplace. But having a new idea is not enough. Because a lot of people have wonderful ideas and they don't do anything with it. So the ultimate difference between creativity and innovation is creating some kind of value. And that is a very significant difference. In fact, there are many patents that exist that are never implemented. You could argue they may not even really be innovations, even though they're wonderful ideas, because nothing happens. It just sits somewhere. So the difference is that when you have a great idea and you do something to create value, that's an innovation. And any of these can be value. It's not just money. It might be a more, it might be making some kind of service or product available to people who couldn't otherwise afford it. That would be what I would call a, it could be, you know, more efficient process to get things out the door faster or cheaper. So any of those are a way of creating value. Improving the quality of life of people is value. So although I'll be talking about overcoming barriers to creativity, the real focus is why the reason it's important is because it leads to innovation. Okay? So let me talk about why there are the fact that there are barriers. This is some research that's done. There's a test to see how creative people are. It's been given to 280,000 adults. And it was also given to the same group of 1,500 students when they were 5 years old, 10 years old, and 15 years old. These are the results. So one group was 2% were measured as being innovative, up to 98%. Which group do you think is this group? The adult? Who else thinks the adults? Who else do you think this might be? 5-year-olds. Who else thinks it might be the 5-year-olds? You can raise your hands. It's all right if you're wrong. Which group do you think this is? 10 and 5? All right, so, oops. Actually, 5, 10, 15 adults. Pretty amazing, huh? Think about it. You ever see a child, you give a child a gift and they're fascinated with the box or the ribbon? And they can spend hours making believe all kinds of things. Can you imagine an adult doing that? Right? So what happens? And what happens is, as we grow up, we are trained to be not creative. Our education system, in many ways, our ability to be socialized into adulthood It's all about limiting our creativity. It's not why we do it, but that's what happens. So what is it that gets in the way? We're going to talk about 5. Judgment, perception, perceptual biases, habits, patterns of mind, assumptions, and last but definitely not least, fear of failure. So let's start with judgment. And I'd rather demonstrate this than just talk about it. So I'd like everybody to find a partner. Why don't you stand up? Wouldn't be bad to have some energy. Everybody stand up and find a partner. And if we're missing somebody, then you can have one group of 3. You can have a group of 3. So I want you, when you leave here, I want you to make believe. Okay, be like a child, make believe. I want you to make believe when you leave here, each of you will have received $1,000,000 in funding for your idea. Pretty exciting, right? And what I want you to do is to plan your party to celebrate your amazing success. So here's what, but I have a small rule. So first person, who's going to be person A? Person A will make a suggestion, like let's go to a restaurant. Okay, that might be a suggestion. The other person, person B, will go next, and that person, whatever you want to say, you have to start with yes, but. Okay? So, yeah, hold on. So you're just going to say yes, but. So person A says, let's do something. Make one suggestion, and person B goes, yes, but, and then the next idea. And then person A will go, yes, but, and continue. Does this make sense? So you'll go back and forth, and the only requirement is that you start with yes, but, and it can be obviously in your own language. You're not going to tell me the results. And I'll give you like 2 or 3 minutes. Okay? So start planning your celebration. Even I understand that. Just keep going. Okay, so stop. All right. All right, so let's stop. How many groups have finished planning? This group finished. You finished. Okay. Let's try the same thing You can either start over or continue where you were. But instead of yes, but, you're going to start each time when you start, you will say yes, and. Okay, so person one makes a suggestion. Person B goes yes, and. Same activity. Take 2 minutes. No, you can start over. You can start planning all over again or keep going or. That's right. All right, everybody stop. So first of all, I don't know if you noticed because you were talking to each other, but the volume in the room was louder, more energy. So what's the difference? What does yes but mean? No. Right? Yes but. So I just want you to become aware. And if you want, you can sit. That's a very little difference. Yes and versus yet but. Think about how many times you have an idea or you're in a meeting and you're going to say something and in your mind you go, yeah, but no one would really agree, or nah, it's not that good. No, good idea. Uh, yeah, but, or think about when you work with other people and they're all excited about an idea and they come in and they say, I've got this great idea. And you say, yes, but, really mean to stop them. That really isn't, usually when you have it in a conversation, people are not consciously saying stop. They are stopping. We are in a mode where we are more likely to look for the negative than the positive. It's just the way we're trained. Think about how often we're asked during education to critique things, find fault with the theory or the problem or the literature. We have very few classes in things that are appreciation, like art appreciation. We are trained to be more critical. We are trained to look for the negative. And ironically, being negative makes you look smarter. People who say no a lot and judge other people sometimes are viewed as being smarter. Unfortunately, because it doesn't advance ideas, it just kills them. So people will have ideas and they'll have all this energy and they keep getting yes, but, and eventually they just leave. Why even bother? So one of the things to become aware of is in yourself, notice how often you're judging your own ideas. Notice how often you do a yes, but to yourself. When someone gives you an idea that you don't think is so great, instead of killing the idea, consciously look for things that are positive about it. It's not what we normally do. Consciously say, what do I like about that idea? Maybe there's a kernel of something in there that I can grow and build on instead of killing it. It's a very interesting dynamic. They say that one of the reasons we tend to be more negative in our view of the world is it was a method of preservation when we were, primitive man trying to escape from the tigers and etc. You're always looking for the negative, but it doesn't necessarily serve us right now. So that's a barrier that children don't have. Children don't yes but. Children, the whole world is yes and, yeah, what else can I do? So that's the first barrier that you need to consciously overcome. Perception. So, which circle is bigger? The one in the center on the left or the one in the center on the right? Same size. But if you just went by your eyes, what do you think you might have said? Which one looks bigger? Yeah, the one on the left looks bigger, but it's not. You know that. So let me give you another example. I want you to listen. Oops. All right, how do I click? There's a video built in there. There we go. Oh, can you go back? Go back. Okay. Okay, doesn't work. That's all right. It's another example of how you can also have perceptual bias in hearing. Why is this relevant, do you think? So sometimes when we see the world, we see it from our own perspective. And we don't realize there are other points of view. So, in the business world, you see this come up a lot when you see marketing talking to the engineering department. And marketing does not understand why engineering doesn't get that product out the door. And engineering doesn't understand why marketing doesn't understand that if they just wait, it will be a perfect product. Just give us a little more time. Right? And each side is very sure they're right. Well, in point of fact, both sides really are right. They're just looking at the world differently. And sometimes we get in our own way because we don't take into account the fact that we see something and we think that's the way it is. And maybe if you took a step over or looked from the other side, you'd see something quite radically different. So one of the things you need to be aware of that can get in the way is that sometimes what you need to do is change your point of view. Now, in some extent, that comes up when you're looking at product development or process development, and you don't ask the customer. Sometimes there's an assumption, a perception that we know what's good for the customer because we know what our point of view is. Simple example. We all, I suspect most of you have smartphones that do a million things. Okay. Most of us, given a chance, we want one that has a lot of features, right? It would be nice if it made coffee and drove our cars too, but not yet. And engineers are always looking to add features. There are people, though, who are intimidated by it, who are afraid of technology. So you give them a smartphone, and to them it's like, I don't want to deal with this. It's too complicated. And so, actually, there's a business, at least here in the U.S., there's a very, very, very simple phone called the Jitterbug Phone. And all the phone does is make calls. It's a portable phone. It looks like a flip phone. Those were very exciting when they first came out. We don't see a whole lot of them now. It's a flip phone, and it dials numbers. Some of them, you can just push one button and it'll dial someone. You can pre-program it, and that is all that it does. Now, most people never even considered it because they thought, why would somebody want a phone that doesn't do anything but make? Because I want something fancier, and the engineers want something fast, and you want something fast. But not everybody does. And because somebody was able to take the position of, gee, maybe for some people, and it tends to be a somewhat older audience that did not grow up with technology. There are people who never have experienced technology. For me, it was kind of a late addition. They kind of don't want to deal with it, and there's a market for that. And it's a very profitable market. They were the only ones who approached that market with a very simple phone, and they charge about $100 for the phone. It's not cheap. Because they were able to, because most people look at it and say, I want the fanciest one. Not everybody does. So you sometimes need to look at situations from a different point of view, and sometimes you can do that by just asking people who are likely to have a different point of view so that you don't get in your own way. Any questions on that? Patterns of mind. All right, I know this is not your language, but can everybody just read across the top two lines? So it's red, black, yellow, blue. Everybody can read that? All right, now, I want you to just read the color of the ink. Just the color of the ink. So what's the color of the ink? Easy, right? Okay. I want you to read the color, not the name. Okay. A little harder? Why is it harder? And what do we usually do when we look at something like that? We read. Right? You give it to a child, of course, who can't read at all. No problem. But we automatically read. And if I timed you going through each of these, it takes a whole lot longer to go through this. Because you have to stop yourself from reading the word. That's a pattern of mind. That's a habit. And sometimes we don't realize that our thinking is so shaped in ways that we used to think. So we just do things the way we always do it, and we don't even question that there might be another way. There was a little girl who once saw her mother cooking. Whenever she cooked this roast, she'd cut it off, put it in the pot, and she said, Mom, why do you always cut the end off the roast? Because my mother did. So that's how I learned how to cook. So she goes to her grandma. She says, Grandma, the end off the roast. She said, because my mother always did, so that's how I learned to cook. Well, fortunately, her great-grandmother was still alive. She said, Great-grandma, why do you always cut the ends off the roast? She said, because the pot was too small. How often do we do things because we've always done it that way without questioning, why do we do it that way? That's a question of habit of mind, of patterns. And it's amazing how common it is in the way we live. You know, it's funny, I don't know if you've seen ketchup bottles. You know what ketchup bottles are, and we have bottles that I can remember where you bang the bottle and the ketchup comes spilling out all over. Now they make upside down bottles. Why didn't we do that before? Right? We want the stuff to come out that way. Why do we store it this way? Because we always did, right? A long time ago. So originally there was a reason why the great grandmother did. The bottles used to be up because there was a reason, but for a long time, not relevant. I can tell you, I used to work for a company. We had all these reports. I was in human resources, and we issued all these reports. I said, why are we doing this? Well, we've always had these reports. I know you always had them. What do you do with them? Nothing. So I'm spending my time putting together a report that you never look at. It took me a while to convince them they should stop asking for these reports. They served no purpose. A lot of the information was readily available online. They could pull it when they wanted. We didn't need to do reports every week or every month. So what does this have to do with creativity? Often, we don't question how we're doing things. Sometimes we just say, well, it's always been that way. Why would I do anything different? And sometimes you need to stop yourself and say, maybe there's a reason, maybe I should question why. Why do we do that? In your own life, just practice doing things differently. I'll lay odds, most of you have the same routine in the morning. The order in which you take your shower, brush your teeth, eat your breakfast, even how you get dressed, you know, pants on first, top on first. It's not right or wrong. It just is. Try doing it differently. If you always, and chances are most of you when you're going to familiar, same path. You ever notice sometimes you wind up someplace and you go, how did I get here? Because you just did it, because you always drive it. Try driving a different path. Wake yourself up to the fact that there are other options. So that's another way that we get in our own way that you can break. It may be uncomfortable, but it will help you to start saying, just question. Don't question to be hostile. Just question to say, well, why do we do it? Is there a better way? Assumptions. So I don't know, how many of you have seen this challenge? Connect the 4 dots, connect the 9 dots. If you've done it. So why don't you try this? Draw the dots should be equidistant from each other. And the challenge is connect all the dots using 4 straight lines without lifting your pen from the paper. So that means you can't do this. You can't do 1, 2, 3. You can't take the pen off. No, you can. That's interesting. Why? I don't know why you would assume that, but. You think you have an answer? You do. Don't share it. One person's figured it out. Thank you for being honest. Don't Google it. I'm sure it's there, but what's the fun in that? That's right. I'll give you a minute or two more to see if you can figure it out. That's a very interesting comment because I can't tell you how often if I give an assignment when I teach class, and people always want to know, can I do this? Can I do that? And I always say, if you ask me, I will give you an answer. And if you don't ask me, you will have more flexibility. And very often I'm teaching a class now and I was asking the students what would help it be a more effective learning experience. And I had 30 people. I had 5 people say, why don't we move our seats and sit in different seats? I said, I never told you you have to sit in the same seats. It's like, I didn't say anything. They just sort of. Does anybody figure this out? No. Anybody want to know how to do it? I'm not going to tell you. No. What makes it hard? What's the problem? And somebody said it. Somebody said you need to get outside the box. Is there a box there? Is there a box? But we assume there's a box because we're used to connecting things that way. But I didn't say you can't go outside the imaginary box. We are so trained to color inside lines that even though there's no box, we think, oh, there's a box. I got to stay right inside those boundaries. It's such a strong thing. I did a workshop where I had adults and I was trying to get them to be innovative in how they ran their lives. And I pulled out pages from a coloring book. And I gave each person a page from the coloring book. And I said, I want you to do whatever you want. Sure enough, everybody's coloring inside the lines. So I said, okay, I want you to color outside. I had people say, I can't do it. It feels so wrong. I can't do it. So that's kind of getting into habits. It's like, I can't color outside the line. I said, you're a grown-up. I just told you can color the line. I can't do it. So sometimes that's a question of going back to habit of mind. I can't color outside the lines is so ingrained. But often we just assume there are lines there when there aren't. It's amazing. Assumptions are. This actually holds true for animals as well. When they have fish tanks, where you have 2 types of fish where one eats the other, we have predators. What they usually do is they'll have a big glass tank put a glass divider. So if the predator fish tries to get across, it bumps its nose on the glass. When they're ready to clean the tank, the way they clean the tank is they remove the glass in between and clean that piece, and the fish assume it's still there. And so the predator does not eat the other fish. It's also how they teach elephants not to run away. They take elephants and they're young and they tie them to a tree with a chain. Elephant tries to move and it can't. And over time they make it a lighter chain, and eventually it's just a lightweight. Elephant thinks it can't do anything, so it doesn't even try. That's the power of assumption. I define assumption as mistaking a belief for a fact. So what you need to do is test it. Actually go see, is it what I think, is it real? And sometimes the worst people to ask are the experts. The world changes, technology changes. I know somebody who led the team that designed the tiles for the heat shield for the shuttle, space shuttle. It has a fancy term. It's some kind of something or other, ablator. But anyway, so they were trying to find something that would be lightweight and flexible and could withstand incredibly high heat. And at one point they thought they might have a solution which would involve taking a certain kind of fabric and impregnating it, soaking it in a particular chemical to see if that would give it some of the properties it needed and adhere to glass. So my friend went to a materials engineer and said, "Will this work?" He said, "No, it won't work." So they kept trying to come up with a solution. I mean, this was important, obviously. You can't fly the shuttle without it. And eventually, his name is, said, "Let's try it." You know, nothing else worked. It's now 6 months, a year later, and nothing worked. That was a solution. The expert said, "No, it will not work." He didn't say, "We haven't tried it." He doesn't say, "It's highly unlikely." No, it will not work. So sometimes experts are not really the best people to ask because they sometimes don't even know what they don't know. So assumptions can really keep you. So you need to question your assumptions. You need to really go check them. Don't go listen to what somebody thinks is the case. Any questions about that? This is last but not least. Fear of failure. This is the one where it's like, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want people to laugh at me. And we tend to see failure as fatal. But the fact of the matter is, failure is, first of all, an inevitable part of creativity. If you're doing something new, by definition, there's a chance it's not going to work. So you can't create or innovate on anything if it's something you've always done. It's like, I can't do something new. Well, think about it. Think about a little child. You ever watch a child learning how to walk? Right? Child will get up, maybe take half a step and fall. Could you imagine if you said, "You're an idiot. What do you mean you can't walk? First of all, people don't do that to the kid. And the kid doesn't say, I tried to walk, I'm done. I will never walk. Right? Kids get up, they take a step, they fall. Get up, they take a step, and fall till they learn. It's a process. And so, first of all, not the end. It's a learning experience. Edison famously said, I haven't failed 1,000 times. I found 1,000 ways a light bulb won't work. It's a mindset. Penicillin. Oops, penicillin. Everybody knows penicillin was a mistake. Right? Everybody knows penicillin was a failed. He was doing research. Fleming's assistant forgot to go and check the bacteria, and all of a sudden he's got this thing growing, and it's an accident. Now, it's a good accident. It's a very positive accident, and many, many, many drugs, accidents are what drive the result. What they start out is not what they end up with. Post-it notes. Post-it notes were an attempt to develop a super strong glue. Right? Super strong glue, yeah. And as you know, Post-it notes don't have super strong glue. Right? So it was considered a failure. But the guy who had come up with it, instead of saying, well, I failed, he said, how might this be useful? And he knew that one of the executives sang in a church choir, and they wanted to mark the hymnals. And, you know, you'd stick a paper in, it would fall out, but you didn't want to mark a page permanently. He said, why don't you try these? And that got the attention of an executive. Most people don't know the second part of the story, though. Even after that, it was decided that nobody would want this product. There's not much of a market for marking hymnals. So this clever person said, I think there might be other uses. So had a whole bunch of material manufactured on the side. And 3M has a whole concept where engineers get 15% of their time to experiment. So it was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Let's manufacture X number of pads. Sent it out to a bunch of executive assistants for major companies and waited. And shortly thereafter, the executive assistants were calling 3M saying, I want some more. Can I order some more? They said, what are you talking about? You know, those things that stick. I'm using it. If it weren't for that, we might not have Post-it notes now. After they realized there was some use, this guy had to come up with a way to make sure people saw there was real value. Creative way of creating a market. Viagra. Anybody know what Viagra was originally designed for? Yep, it's for heart disease. Yep. And they gave it to people to test it for heart. Didn't have the desired result. For some reason, the men on the trial didn't want to stop using it. And I suspect that they may not have initially said why. But the chemical company kind of went, well, why don't you, it's not helping your blood pressure, it's not helping your heart, why do you want it? It's a very popular drug now. Makes a lot of money. By the way, Prozac. Have any of you heard of Prozac? It's an antidepressant, but it was designed to be a weight loss drug. And again, it didn't lead to weight loss, but saccharin. Anybody know how saccharin was developed? Artificial sweetener? It's a artificial sugar. So one of the companies that made coal was looking for alternative uses for coal tar. Actually, I didn't know that, but I realized. So they were working on how to use coal tar, and one of the people doing it didn't wash his hands thoroughly, was eating something and noticed it was sweet. That turned out to be the basis for saccharin, which now is not used in most of the U.S. because you can understand why. Teflon, another failed experiment. They were looking for a new form of refrigerant in a cooler, and they were using different compounds. One day, one of the canisters was not properly sealed. They opened it up, and instead of what they expected, there was this white, waxy stuff kind of lining the can. But it weighed the same as a full can. And this was a case of noticing. So the person who did this said, okay, this obviously didn't work. What might this be good for? And started to look and realize that the slipperiness of it could be very useful, and eventually developed it into the Teflon product. But that was not what they were looking for. Interesting, huh? It's amazing. These are just some of them. There's so many stories of failure. People think a failure. It's not a failure. It's. Sometimes you learn, and you learn to get something. You made a mistake, but sometimes you go, that may have been a failure, but wow. Pacemaker. Pacemaker was actually an attempt to measure heartbeat, to listen to a heartbeat. And the guy working on it somehow put the wrong transistor in the wrong place and recognized this dun-dun, dun-dun rhythm as the heartbeat, and realized that maybe instead of listening to heartbeats, it could stimulate heartbeats and make sure they stayed even. But that wasn't what he was working on at the time. So there are just so many stories like this of failures, but they weren't failures. So, summary of all of this. If you want to be able to be innovative, it starts with creativity. So you need to adapt a yes and mentality. Look for what will work, not for what will not work. And give yourself permission to express ideas that you have. Don't shut yourself down. Consider a different point of view. And sometimes that may mean physically putting yourself in a different position so you view the room differently. And sometimes it's by asking other people. Break your habits of mind. Part of that would be, trying different things. Get yourself in the habit of doing things differently. And notice you'll be uncomfortable. You will be uncomfortable. But it's not wrong. It's just uncomfortable. Have you ever done this? You ever cross your arms? Everybody cross your arms. And then put them the other way. How does that feel? I've had people where I say they do that and they kind of go like this and they wind up in the same position. But just question it. Test and retest assumptions, especially when experts think they know. By the way, I meant to say there are some assumptions that have been made by some very smart people that were very wrong. Has anyone ever heard of digital equipment company, DEC? You've heard of it. I've heard of it. It's gone, right? It's a very successful computer company. And the founder and CEO, Ken Olsen, when PCs started to come around, he said, no one wants a computer at home. Nobody wants a computer at home. There's no market for it. How many people have one computer at home? 2, 3, 4. He didn't say, well, no one's ever wanted a computer, and we don't think they may. He just said, nobody wants a computer at home. That's why there's no more that computer. Honestly. I mean, this comes up time and time again. The head of the British Scientific Association in the late 1800s said, it's impossible to fly. Man will never fly. 10 years later, we had the Wright brothers. The person who ran Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer only said, nobody wants to hear actors talk. Right? Nobody wants to hear actors talk. Can you imagine silent movies made anymore? There was one made recently. A few years ago, there was an Italian film made. It was a great film, but most films aren't like that. So these are people who are experts, who really know their fields, and they're wrong. But they don't say it hasn't worked before or we don't know. It's like, oh no, it won't work. So test assumptions. Something that may have not worked before may work now because the situation has changed. And by the way, that question of situation, timing is a factor. I don't know how many of you remember there was a company called, I think it was Iridium, a long time ago that was going to have, portable phones that would be globally. It was a great idea, but there was no infrastructure. So it didn't work then, but do we have satellite communication now with portable phones all over the place? So that's a situation where it didn't work then. It does work now because the situation is different. So even if something didn't work, you can't say it didn't work, so we shouldn't try it again. Things change. Materials that are available change. Technology changes. Things change. And last but not least, don't be afraid of failure. Having an experiment that doesn't work, having a company that doesn't work, doesn't mean you are a failure. Don't make that mistake. You're in Silicon Valley. One of the things that people know in Silicon Valley is that people here fail all the time. Lots of people who are successful, you'll find out they had several things that didn't work before. And sometimes VCs look to see how many operations you were involved with that failed, because they see that as an opportunity to say, okay, if you went through it once, you know what not to do. It's a learning experience. You're better to have tried and done something reasonable and it failed than not trying at all. So those would be my key takeaways. Any questions? I agree. It's not like you should never, ever critique. Particularly if you're in a situation where you're working on advancing an idea, and then you're making refinements, yes, you do need to critique. The problem is when somebody comes up with something that might be something you hadn't anticipated. Or maybe this would be something you want to try in addition. If you instantly kill it, you may miss out on some way to grow what business you have planned. But there is a time for refinement. So good clarification. It's just too often we kill ideas before they get anywhere. Any other questions or comments? Sure. I have some cards. Yeah. Great. Thank you.